Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Practicing Democracy, Voter Education and Engagement workshop. My name is Ellen Knutson. I'm the program manager for Practicing Democracy, and really thrilled that you all are here for the artificial intelligence and the election workshop. Also super thrilled that April Dawson and Shabbat Grady from NC Central University are here with us. As we're getting started, it would be great if everyone could type a quick introduction into chat, who you are, where you're zooming in from. I myself am zooming in from Portland, Oregon, so I have the West Coast, holding down out here. And before I turn things over to April and Siobhan, I want to say just a couple words about this workshop series. We're actually in month 3 of it and halfway through that month, so coming to the end of this 3-month series, where we've been showcasing speakers and projects that stimulate conversation and demonstrate best practices so that our campuses can really develop a strong capacity and build a campus commitment to a healthy democracy. This month, we've really been focused on ways that we can incorporate voter education into the classroom and building some strong campus community ties. At the end of today's session, I'm going to highlight a couple of the last 3 of the upcoming workshops. But for right now, I'll post into chat where you can find the registration for those. And also, if you've missed any of the workshops in February, March, or earlier this month, I sent it to the waiting room. I'll try to send that to everyone in chat this time. All of our workshops have been recorded, and so all of them are up and ready for you to review. I also want to give a note of or a shout to AASCU's Civic Learning and Democratic Engagement meeting, which will be happening in June in Detroit. And as part of that, there'll certainly be a number of sessions that are focused on voter education, and we'll also be doing a little bit of a voter summit as part of our ADP meeting on June 4th. So if you're an ADP campus, please mark your calendar for that. But everyone should, mark your calendar and consider joining us in Detroit for the Civic Learning and Democratic Engagement meeting. And again, I've put the link to that there. And now I'm very, very happy to introduce today's presenters, just very briefly, because I know that you came to hear them and not me. But April Dawson is the Associate Dean of Technology and Innovation and a professor of law at North Carolina Central University School of Law. And she oversees the operation of NC Central's Technology Law and Policy Center. And she is the author of a very recently published book, Artificial Intelligence and Academic Integrity. And is actually joining us from Boulder today, speaking at a meeting there on AI and the law. So welcome, April. I'm glad that you could find some time for us today. And Siobhan Grady is the assistant professor and program director for information science and systems at the School of Library and Information Science at NC Central. And there she heads the Laboratory for Artificial Intelligence and Equity Research and also co-directs the Center for Data Equity. And she began this amazing journey as the first woman to earn a PhD in computer science from North Carolina's A&T State University. So I'm really thrilled to have you both here. And I'm going to stop my screen share and turn the virtual Zoom floor over to April and Siobhan. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ellen. So I'm going to share my screen. And then we will yeah, jump right into it. All right, can everyone see the screen okay?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, excellent. So again, I'm April Dawson, the Associate Dean of Technology and Innovation at NCCU School of Law. Delighted to be here. I'll let Dr. Grady go ahead and say her quick welcome, and then we'll go ahead and jump into our presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Siobhan Grady, and I'm a program director and assistant professor over in the School of Library and Information Sciences here at NCCU. And I want to, before Dean Dawson gets into our discussion here today, our presentation, I invite you to actually drop in the chat, your position, where you're from, so we can know a little bit more about what university you might be representing and what your role is there. And also, please use the reactions to interact with us and let us know if you're really enjoying something, clap, all of that. We welcome you to engage with us.
Okay, so we've got a lot to talk about whenever you're talking about AI, a lot to talk about when you're talking about elections, again, a lot to talk about. So this is just kind of a quick overview of what we hope to discuss. So we're going to just give a real quick overview of AI technology, and then we're going to talk about how AI is being used to facilitate misinformation and disinformation when we're thinking about the election and campaigning. Also, how AI is being used to suppress voter turnout, how AI is being used to undermine the faith in our elections, how AI is being used to hack election systems, and then to not end it on a negative note, kind of talk about solutions and safeguards that we can employ to make sure that the benefits of AI are exploited while the challenges and threats are mitigated.
All right, so we're going to start with a brief overview of what AI is, because we are not sure what everybody's familiarity is. And so what we want you to know is, when you think about artificial intelligence, you can just think of a basic definition here, as you can see, is machines mimicking our human intelligence. They're able to perform tasks like sensing, comprehending, acting, and learning. And a lot of what we use or see every day today is considered something that's not here on the slide, but it's called narrow AI, which uses machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence that enables machines to learn and improve an experience. And also it has a predictability feature there. And a lot of you might use things like, I'm sorry, Professor Dawson, might use something called natural language processing as well, such as your Google Home devices, Alexa devices, Siri, and others that use all of this technology. So this is just a brief overview of what artificial intelligence is, and you already are using it in your everyday life.
All right, so this is a very timely quote here. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting its shoes on. This has been attributed to Mark Twain. And that is a helpful quote to kind of contemplate as we're thinking about misinformation and disinformation, especially as it relates to the election. And so first, misinformation, so, inaccurate, false information. Oftentimes misinformation is unintended or accidental. So if someone believes that the polls, close at 5 o'clock, but actually they close at 4 o'clock, and they're sharing that information, not realizing that it's inaccurate, right? That's misinformation. That happens all the time. But then we have also disinformation. Now, disinformation is when there is a deliberate effort and intent to spread false or misleading information to deceive or manipulate public opinion in some way, shape, or form that will have some impact on, in this context, an election. Also, when we're thinking about misinformation and disinformation, just kind of thinking about it from an election standpoint, we'll talk about the implications of AI or the way that AI can amplify these issues. Like if someone is engaged in disinformation, they're often doing it in some coordinated way. And so pamphlets, right, that have misinformation, inaccurate information, spreading that around, putting flyers on people's cars, right? And so when we're talking about disinformation, it's oftentimes done in a coordinated effort. And we'll talk about how AI allows that to be done in a much more speedy way and far-reaching way. When we think about the impact in an election context in terms of misinformation and disinformation, it really wreaks havoc on our election system, faith in the system, which we'll talk about in greater detail. It confuses citizens. It just really does undermine our democracy. And so in this country, we have always placed a lot of concern when it comes to misinformation and disinformation as it relates to elections. And also when we're thinking about disinformation, it also undermines our ability to even engage in thoughtful discourse, right? So if false information is being parroted or false information is being put out there, then we can't have an accurate, open, kind of honest discussion about the actual facts that are going on and that are taking place. And that, of course, undermines our democracy as well.
And I just want to add to what Professor Dawson mentioned. Everything is correct. And we see this happening more with social media. It just exacerbates everything with the use of AI. And so how does AI facilitate the mis and disinformation? Well, the first thing is with these AI tools, automated content is easily able to be created. And so we're not sure, but if you just give a reaction or show of hands, how many of you are using ChatGPT? That is a tool that has a free version that many have access to, and it can create fake news and also misinformation. And it also has hallucinations, which you may or may not be aware of. It's not always correct and accurate information. Additionally, there may be some micro-targeting. So this is happening when there are political-based ads that are targeted for certain groups. And this has happened in previous elections too. And with AI, it's much easier to make this happen. And lastly, you've probably heard a lot about this, which Professor Dawson will dive into next, but deep fakes. It's not enough that we have this content that's text-based and also maybe some images, but now we actually have videos, a different type of media, a medium out there that might also be helping to exacerbate the spread of mis and disinformation. So all of this is just letting you know this is enabling the production and the spread of misinformation in new ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to underscore that last point that Dr. Grady said, which is it's enabling it. This is not new, right? Misinformation, disinformation, when it comes to elections, this has always taken place. If you go back to the history of our country, right, this has always existed. And what AI is allowing bad actors to do is to do it easier, right? Having access to these tools more quickly, more convincingly, and at scale. And that's what's causing a lot of consternation amongst those of us that are really concerned about the health of our democracy.
One other thing too, also undetected, because we don't know where it's coming from. We don't know who wrote it, who did it, which is the even scarier part as far as trust is concerned.
Absolutely. And that leads right directly into deep fakes. So when we're thinking about AI and these tools, and we've all, this is not new information to us. We are all aware of deep fakes, even if we have not created them ourselves. we have all seen them, been exposed to them, heard about them in the news. And if everyone could, in the chat, if there's a particular deep fake or story that you've heard about, if you could just go ahead and put that in the chat. And these tools are just making it very easy, right? And so when we're thinking about, right, when we're thinking about deep fakes, we have deep fakes when we're thinking about videos, when we're thinking about images, when we're thinking about audio. And so I'm assuming that most people have heard about the audio deep fake that was sent around in New Hampshire during the New Hampshire primary. It was in the form of a robocall. It was Joe Biden's voice, had his mannerisms. He said something like malarkey, right? And when you hear that audio, there's no reason to believe, other than the content, that it's not Joe Biden. It's incredibly convincing. And that robocall was telling voters, particularly Democratic voters, not to vote in the New Hampshire primary, in the Democratic New Hampshire primary. And it was a complete deep fake, and it was created by someone who was not, like Dr. Grady, have their PhD in computer science. It was someone who really is, disattached to kind of the computer science space, but they were able to use some of these easily available tools to make this audio, and then to facilitate this robocall being going out to thousands and thousands of voters. We don't know directly what impact this had on the turnout, but again, because it's hard to know, the turnout for Democrats participating in the primary in New Hampshire was pretty high, but it could potentially have been even higher. And so that's an example of a deep fake. Slovakia, they had one of the progressive candidates who was running for president in that country. There was a deep fake that was that went around, actually 2 audios that had gone around. One of them saying he had taken steps to rig the election. The other, he was talking about raising the price or taxes on beer. It was went viral. He took steps to try to get the audios taken down. In some situations, some of the platforms were able to take them down. Some of them didn't take them down, but had indications on the audio that this may be false. But even though he was able to get some of the audio taken down, it had already gone viral, right? And just because it's down on the platforms, it doesn't mean that those audios weren't saved in some other place and then generated around on other platforms. And so deepfakes, so easy to create, really hard. And this kind of goes back to Mark Twain's point, which is, right, as far as the lie traveling halfway around the world while the truth is still putting its shoes on, before you even know, right, these audios, these deep fakes can go viral. And this is just a growing threat that, right, globally, we, are aware of this issue, but it's hard to solve the problem. When we think about deep fakes, this is just a way in which to perpetrate disinformation. And it's used to manipulate voters in terms of what truth is, what accurate information is. It's used to mislead voters in so many different ways. Our government, and all governments actually, there are, to kind of go back a minute, there are about 60 countries who have elections that are going on here in 2024. So this is an incredibly busy year when we're thinking about elections that are taking place. And of course, we know since November 2022, how much AI has been in the news, how much those that have never really thought about using AI are using AI now. So this is a moment in time where we're probably even still behind the curve in terms of addressing these issues. But as far as in the United States, we've got the Federal Communication Commission, And after the audio deepfake in New Hampshire, they passed a law outlawing AI-generated robocalls aimed at discouraging voters. And then also we have the major tech companies that have all signed an accord to prevent AI from being used to disrupt democratic elections worldwide. So there have been some steps that are being taken, but it's still incredibly challenging. Dr. Grady, I want to turn it over to you to see if you have anything that you want to add to this point.
I just want to add one point. Remember, everyone, today's session is to inform you about AI as far as harms it can cause with elections, but know that AI still has good in it too. But just remember, the focus of this is to just inform you of the possibilities on what can happen and what might already be happening in some ways. So I'm just going to go ahead and compliment what Professor Dawson has already shared with you all. And keep in mind, a lot of these things that you see on this screen are not exclusive to AI, but just remember, AI just helps exacerbate these things and is scaled faster and quicker and all of that. So first of all, when it comes to voter manipulation and inauthentic persuasion, when it comes to a definition, employing persuasive techniques that lack genuineness, transparency, or alignment with the candidate's true values and beliefs. That is what's happening with these tools. Also, when I mentioned social media earlier, because, we are well past the days of just newspaper. We use technology to get access to news outlets and mediums, and so do bots. Bots can do a lot of automated things like share and propagate misinformation online, unfortunately, and that happens quite a bit. And it's happened within the last few elections, honestly. So they can comment on posts, and if someone's not really paying attention or well-versed in this technology, they may be fooled and thinking these are real accounts that are interacting. Also, fake accounts. This happens quite a bit. So people posing as real people and posting, certain propagandas and also misinformation and also manipulating the discourse that needs to happen, which is what we've been discussing. And then astroturfing. This is where, an artificial type of intelligence is, is actually inflating grassroots support and also for a cause or for a candidate through some type of fake account. And that happens quite a bit too. Also, we've talked about micro-targeting earlier, but again, where different groups are identified and actually sought out to, give them misinformation or persuade them one way when it's not true, that happens quite a bit. And again, these are not exclusive to AI. And lastly, we've seen this one a lot too, but using psychological and emotional tactics. Using authority, liking or scarcity in a manipulative way or fear. And I don't want to point out too many things, but we really saw a lot of this with our last election. A lot of this stuff happens quite a bit, and we know that will continue to happen because not only the presidential role, but elections in general are just so important that people want to capitalize on them and have things go one way or the other. So we just need to be informed so that we can make the right decision when we're going to the polls and casting our ballots. But all of these things you've probably seen happen at some point within your lifetime, and they're going to continue to happen with the spread and use of these artificial intelligence tools.
Yes. And one of the things we'll touch upon again in a later slide, but it really kind of ties to what Dr. Grady was talking about. But if you think about Cambridge Analytica and gaining information from Facebook, using that to create profiles of particular individuals and groups, and then targeting those specific groups, right? Manipulating, making those fake accounts, giving an impression that, something is true or has a particular level of support when it might not, right? And so for those of us who are of a particular generation, like we remember before there was even cable. Like I remember when there was just the 3 networks. I remember when cable became a thing. I remember before there were, cell phones and no social media. And we remember a time when we all got our information from a limited number of sources. So newspapers, television news, and it was much more challenging to try and target just a specific group. So there's a lot to be said about our communities being able to, in our society, being able to gather information from multiple sources. But what that also means is there's a means by which to make sure that people are siloed and that they are in echo chambers, and that can be manipulated in a way that can cause people to be misled about actually what's going on in the larger community, not just their echo chambers. And that leads to this next slide, which I don't think we can underscore enough. It's like, do we really? So it's not just that there's misinformation and manipulation and disinformation that's going on, but it really does undermine our entire society and our communities and our democracy. And so when you have like this repeated misinformation and manipulation, whether you know it or not, right, it causes people to distrust, like when it becomes known that people are being manipulated, or if it becomes known that there are these deep fakes and you believed it initially and then found out later that it was false, right? So this distrust of everything, and that really does undermine our democracy and our society. And then of course the tribalism and divisions, the echo chambers. And really, when we think about those who are in the business of causing the division and the misinformation and the disinformation and the manipulation, it's like, what's the purpose behind it? Not only is it to get people to vote maybe in a particular way or not vote at all, but it's also to sow division, right? If we are a divided country, a divided society, then it undermines our democracy. And this is one of the reasons why, when we think about how AI is being leveraged, it is being leveraged by foreign adversaries as well, right? And again, it's like, why? What is the purpose behind that? It will undermine our country, our society, our communities. Also, let's see, last thing, and then we'll move on to the next slide. But when we think about, you know, the whole point of our country and the First Amendment is for us to be able to engage in debate and discourse. And if you have misinformation, disinformation, manipulation, it really does undercut our ability to engage in thoughtful discussion and to reach, right, compromise. If you think about our current federal legislative gridlock that's going on, like we're talking a lot, right? This session is talking about AI, but you all have been talking about AI in your circles and your communities, with your employers, or in your place of employment. And legislators, right, at the state level and the federal level, they have been talking about it as well. Well, one of the things that we'll talk about in a later slide is, well, what more needs to be done? And it's frightening if our politics, the way it currently exists, will be able to move to a point where actual progress is being made, as opposed to just talking about these problems that are upon us. Right, here we are in April, middle of April, almost May. We have our general election that is taking place in November. What more needs to be done to try to mitigate the efforts of those that are trying to undermine our democracy? And is our legislative bodies equipped to do that? Or are we a society where we are so siloed that we can't even come together and have sincere debate and compromise and move forward? And so sowing misinformation, disinformation, manipulation just really does hurt our democracy.
I just wanted to add to what you said, Professor Dawson. In addition, Also, it causes us to be desensitized because we don't know who to trust, what to trust, which is not a good thing. And to your point about foreign entities, it is nothing more than cyber warfare. You know, we do have this wonderful democracy, and it is compromised through the use of these AI tools and technology when they're able to get their messaging and propaganda to our citizens. So it's really unfortunate. And to add to that, to voter suppression tactics, and some of this Professor Dawson already covered, so I won't get into the targeting of specific communities because she gave you that example. But we have really touched on spreading misinformation. I think we are all clear that you all know what that is now. So again, that's just giving misleading information. And especially we see this happening a lot too with voter laws changing. So where or how people need to vote, there can be misinformation about that, which will cause frustration for people who are going to the polls because they'll be all confused on what they need to do. Also, when we think about purging voter rolls using AI, when we use AI to remove eligible voters from registration lists. And again, we don't want people to be frustrated. We want people to be able to go and do what they need to do. So if there's inaccuracy using the technology, minor issues like that can happen and cause people not to be able to vote. And then also gerrymandering, which is a big, big thing. So AI is also being used by some groups to, redraw those districts for mapping purposes, so folks will know where to go to vote. But it's done in a way that dilutes the voting power of minorities through gerrymandering tactics like packing and cracking. And what we want to do in this democracy is make sure that everyone's voice is heard, that they know where to go, they know the laws if they need to bring their identification, that they're aware and able to get their vote casted. But the use of these tools, again, it allows more information to put out there, but sometimes it's not the right information. And so hopefully something will be done hopefully by the November election. So a lot of this won't happen. So we won't hear things like the election was stolen and other things like that. We want to make sure everyone's voice is heard.
Yes. And, all of these tactics, everything that we've talked about, right? It really does undermine faith in our system as a whole. And again, the point of a democracy is to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to cast their ballot. And then, right, whatever the result is, we all accept that, and then we move forward as a society. And anytime you have efforts to try and suppress the vote or to manipulate the vote, it undermines our election system, which then further undermines our democracy. And so there are ways that AI is being used, and a lot of these things we've already talked about. And the misuse of AI in the election context has multiple impacts, right? And so want to just focus a little bit and highlight what it does to the faith in our system. And so one way that AI is being used is to attack and crash our election systems. And so we'll talk about a little later on ways to mitigate that, right? And so again, as Dr. Grady noted, AI, there are, both of us, we teach an AI in the law class. We are big fans of technology. Even though I have my law degree, my undergraduate degree is computer science. And we appreciate all of the good that comes from technological advances and AI in particular. But it can be used for great harm, right? And so we've got to think about, if it can be used in this way, what specific acts and mitigation efforts do we need to have in place? And so AI can help us with the vote, right? It can help us make sure that the votes are calculated quickly. But whenever you use technology when it comes to voting, then there are also some vulnerabilities. And so we need to be mindful of that. When we think about the voter rolls, and so the registration databases, right? All of our information and data, right? It's being stored in digital form somewhere. If we don't have good cybersecurity measures, then it's easy for bad actors to access that information. And I think it's at a point where we have all either directly or indirectly experienced some cyber attack. And right, and those cybersecurity professionals will say often, loudly and often, it's not if you will be hacked, it is when you will be hacked. We will all be victims of it at some point in time. It's just inevitable, right? And the question is, well, what do you have in place to address it when it does inevitably happen? And so the same is true when we're thinking about how much of our data related to voting we have in digital form. And these are ways, right? If you don't have a plan of action in case something happens on election day or during early voting, then you really will have chaos, which will undermine the election results. Deep fakes, we've already talked about that. Foreign propaganda, just want to underscore this again, right? There were stories recently in the news, right, about Russian propaganda, Chinese propaganda, and there, right, this is not a surprise, and we know that it will happen. So how do we make sure that we have measures in place to mitigate against that? Bogus claims of voter fraud, right? And this ties directly into the faith that we have in the election system. If you have misinformation, manipulation, disinformation, then once you do have the results, there will be claims of voter fraud or an imperfect system. And then again, AI is being used to amplify those claims, even if those claims are unfounded. So AI, a number of great uses for it, but it can be used very well to undermine the faith in our election systems. Dr. Grady, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yes, I do. And I want to thank all of our participants that are here. And I want to just state something that I think we forget about sometimes, because all of us are probably from a university setting, but we sit at a place of privilege. Most of the world is not, or I should say Americans are not necessarily thinking about AI and this impact, but because we're in higher education, this is something we're aware of. So I do feel my personal thing, and I know Professor Dawson feels the same way. It's our jobs to educate others that we know. So as we're learning, I just ask you all to take this information back as well and share with those that you know that may not be aware of how AI is being used to you know, change elections. So just want to put that out there, but everything is spot on, Professor. And I'm just going to add to what you stated and just also talk about these consequences when we have a lack of faith in election integrity. And I'm going to share with you this what's on the screen, but I think you all can cut on your televisions and think about a lot of things you saw post 2020 from our last election. So we know that when people have no faith, a lot of times there is a lower voter turnout. They're not going to show up to the polls because they have that distrust. And again, AI is helping that be spread faster, and that's what we don't want. Also, there will be opportunities for increased civil unrest and protest. Now, we want everybody to have their, freedom of speech, but it shouldn't be to the cost of, people not trusting the system and actually having this civil unrest. But we've seen this happen. And if you haven't seen it happen yet, I guarantee you'll see it happen at some point within your lifetime, because that's how serious elections are. And then also lawsuits that are drawn out and being contested, legal battles having, and again, this is, I think about our last election, having ballots recounted. And what we want, or what should happen, is we just have to accept the outcomes of our elections, but we don't want AI to be used in a way that is actually just making all of these issues worse. We want it to help, but as Professor Dawson said, we're proponents of technology. But when I think about our current president, he put an executive order out there last year about AI, and it talks about the promise of AI, but it also talks about the perils of AI. So it has both promise and peril. But again, we don't want artificial intelligence to, we don't want this to happen where there's this election integrity issue happening and these consequences, but it does happen. And when it does happen, there's a widespread negative outlook on our democracy. And also it causes a lack of process and civil harmony. Anything to add there, Professor Dawson?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? There are consequences, and if we don't take specific measures, the problems that we're currently experiencing in our country, they're only going to get worse. They're only going to get worse. Let's see. This next slide, I think I'm going to skip this slide because we've kind of talked about those, and we've got just a little bit of time left, and we want to leave some time for questions. And we want to talk about strategies to combat misinformation and restore trust. And these are, really, really important points, because there are some things that we can do. And to Dr. Grady's point about, we are in a privileged position and we are educated and educators. And so how can we learn about these situations and educate others within our sphere, and particularly our students and young people? So when we think about strategies to combat misinformation, so the first is, and this is really, really important, and this is one of the reasons why we so appreciate Ellen inviting us to be able to talk with you about AI and the election, because there needs to be transparency around the election process. It's like we need to make sure that as a society, we understand how elections work. Because if AI is being used to undermine our faith in our election system, the only way that we can really combat that is to make sure that people understand how the election process works. So for example, if when you're voting, right, and you're casting your ballot, and you've got, like in North Carolina, we've got, our ballot, we put it into a machine, the machine is, working on our ballot. And well, what happens to the actual physical ballot at that point? How are the votes actually calculated? The more transparency that we have around the actual election process, right? What happens if there does need to be a recount? Like our government should be educating society and the community about the election process before there is an issue, right? So we know what to expect. That's vitally, vitally important. Voter education initiatives. So right? So it's good that we're talking about, and it's in the news, that there are deep fakes, and that these deep fakes and disinformation may be used. We have to make sure that we communicate that even more. And so if we think about, right, how are young people getting their information? That our, federal government, Congress is talking about banning TikTok. Well, there are so many young people of a particular generation that use TikTok to get their information. Is that susceptible to disinformation? Are we communicating that to people who get their information through social media versus the newspaper, the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, or Fox News or MSNBC? Like, how are they getting their information, and are we communicating what they need to be mindful of within the election process, right? So we need to do that. And then we also have to make sure that there are laws in place to punish those who are engaged in using any type of efforts to disinform or to suppress the vote, particularly if they are using, but not just limited to, if they're using AI. So a perfect example of that is we now have a new regulation from the Federal Communications Commission saying you can't use, right, deep fake audio to try and discourage people from voting. Prior to that agency regulation, that was not necessarily illegal, not necessarily. There may have been some laws that you could couch, but we do need to have more targeted, specific laws that address bad actors who are leveraging AI to further engage in disinformation, misinformation, and violating good practices when it comes to our election time period. And let's see, Dr. Grady, did you have anything to add to that? We've got another.
Yes, I do. And I'll go over it on the next slide too. But I just want to say, I love what you mentioned about the TikTok and young people using that. We have to remember that we want to meet people where they are. We're not all at the same place. And that's also part of what we kind of touched on previously about the digital inequities, or what most of us know as the digital divide. Everybody's not at the same place. And so there's already a disparity there. Another strategy as well, in addition to what's been previously discussed, is fact-checking initiatives. One of my favorite, used to be outlets, was Twitter. It's now called X, but the former CEO during the elections and other things, they would do fact-checking. But we need more initiatives like that, especially during elections, that can help people know whether the information that they're seeing is actually true or not. Because again, everybody doesn't know how to spot a bot on their social media account or something they see, but we need more fact-checking initiatives. Also, as Professor Dawson just mentioned, more regulations around transparency as well. So we need laws that actually can provide the disclosure on who's behind political ads and where the information is coming from to reduce this disinformation. And lastly, also we've been talking about literacy. Professor Dawson touched on it as well, but we need other literacy that actually helps people think critically behind the identity of misinformation and how to make informed decisions. We can't overstate this enough, but everybody's not at the same place. A lot of people don't understand misinformation or how it's propagated online and other things. So there needs to be some type of literacy effort to inform people that maybe they can do their best due diligence to understand if they saw a deep fake or how they might even go to identify a deep fake. Again, a bot that's propagating some misinformation. There just needs to be more education around that so people can know what to spot and what to look for. And again, it's going to take a multi-pronged approach to do this. So a combination of the technology, policies, and education is going to be needed if we really want to combat the mis and disinformation that is happening because of elections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing I want to underscore that Dr. Grady was saying in terms of the, where's this ad coming from and the whole transparency. And so you all have probably heard about efforts to put watermarks on content, right? How do we know if something is AI generated? Putting watermarks on it. And so that's something that was included in the president's executive order that Dr. Grady has already mentioned. Like, how do we do that? The other thing that the executive branch, the president's administration, and legislators and tech individuals, tech companies are talking about is what types of indicia and watermarks can we put on non-AI generated videos, for example, so that if you see a video, that it has some indication that, yes, this has been verified, that this is in fact accurate. It's an accurate representation of what it purports to be. And so these are things that, that our legislators are talking about, trying to put measures in place. The challenge, of course, is that our laws move very slow and our legislators move very slow. But as we all know, the technology moves incredibly fast. Even though there's been a lot of discussion about watermarking, it's unclear when that will happen and if that will take place by November. And so that goes to Dr. Grady's other point about the media literacy education, like making sure that even if we don't have watermarks in place yet, are we training society and our community, and particularly our young people, with how to determine if something is misinformation or not, right? That should be a part of the standard curriculum, really at all levels, beginning at elementary school, but at all levels, we need to make sure that we are educating our community about AI, these tools, and how to be able to distinguish between something that is authentic and something that is not. All right, so we have about 9 minutes left. We wanted to save some time. Oh, let's see. There was one. Okay,
That's the
one
last
last.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay, Dr. Grady, I'll let you go ahead and.
No, you can do that one if you
Oh,
want. Since you
okay.
did
All
the
right.
last one. No.
Okay. I'll do this quickly. Okay. So, and again, when we're thinking about technology and we're thinking about artificial intelligence, so improved cybersecurity, we've already talked about that. That's vitally important if we're going to have a digital society, which we do, and there are advantages to that. Paper ballots, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about before. Yes, we are using technology as people are casting their ballots. We're using AI increasingly more when it comes to voting. Well, what do we do in the event that there is an issue? We have to be able to have paper ballots. There has to be some mechanism for being able to manually count. And we need to know in advance what the plan is before the plan has to be implemented, right? And then when we think about voter verified paper audit trails, again, we don't want to wait until, November after the general election to hear that there's been a problem and now there is some process in place. We need to know beforehand. And so making sure that everyone is on the same page as to what our election system looks like will help us to restore trust in our election system. And so, Dr. Grady, did you have anything to add to that before we get to questions?
No, I'll go ahead and turn it over so we can get questions in. But no, everything's great.
Okay.
Yes. And I want to thank those who already dropped in the chat where you're from. We have a lot of people from one university. Thank you all for coming. But if you haven't put your information in the chat, please do so. And I guess we can have you come off mute for questions, or did you want to do that another way, Ellen?
No, coming off of mute is great. Thank you, Professor Dawson, Dr. Grady. Yeah, please, folks, what are your questions? And as you're doing that, I'm dropping into chat a link to evaluation survey for this session. So if you can, click on it, have it open for when it's over, that'd be terrific.
I'll ask a question. I'm curious, because you're following the policy discussions going on in Washington. Are they having the right conversations? Because it was really kind of embarrassing to watch them talk about controlling social media before in the Congress. They didn't really understand what the issues were. Do you feel like they're on track with this, what you're talking about here today?
I think so. I mean, I have been impressed with our legislators, particularly at the federal level, bringing together those that have more knowledge. So they're bringing in kind of the tech CEOs, those researchers, academics, and I think they're having the right discussions and they're asking the right questions. I think the problem is that, and even though these hearings, like the Senate just had a hearing, the Senate Judiciary Committee just had a hearing a couple of weeks ago on AI and elections and deep fakes, and it was a really good discussion. The problem is it's just too slow. It's like, here we are in April, and they're just now having that robust discussion. And even with the discussion, there were still some questions like, well, okay, these are great questions. We're very concerned. What's the next step? Like, really, what is the next step? And it's going to have to be a multi-pronged approach, but how do we accomplish that in time to mitigate things that we know are coming for the November election? So that's kind of my take on that. I'm happy the discussions are taking place, but I think our congressional kind of system is still dysfunctional.
I want to add one thing, Professor Dawson, to your point. I agree. And I also want to just share that, I have concerns because every new administration we get in has a different priority. So while Biden has kind of made this also a prioritization, depending on what happens next, things may change. AI may not be a focal point. So that's the other thing that people have to think about as they're going out to the polls and voting for their leaders. That's probably why it's moved so slow too, because everybody doesn't have the same priorities, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you for that question.
I do see something in the chat, but I think, John, you were just sharing. Did you want to talk about that or?
Thank you, Dr. Grady. It just a couple of, I have 2 pages of notes. Thank you. This has been wonderful. As we all do, looking for people's comments in opposition to what we might believe in researching this quick research, doing a Google. Here's some information from folks who, as I understand, lean in a particular political direction, who are saying, well, we can't have media literacy because it's going to be politicized. Okay. And I'm going to skip to one other item. We have a controversial speaker coming to campus tonight. The registration for this was run by the organization who's sponsoring this, or the speaker. You had to register online. And then while you were speaking earlier on this hour, it dawned on me that just made a concern even stronger, that this organization now has the names and contact information of the folks who have registered. And this, by the way, will also include walk-ins. You can't just walk in, you have to register. Supposedly, this was done to protect the speaker because there have been people who registered for events and then were hecklers at the very least. Okay. But now they've got all these data, all this information, and they can plug it into a bot and then be targeting these folks with other messages. Thank you for this. This has been a wonderful educational hour for me, sincerely. Thank you.
Yeah, you are very welcome. As far as the politicizing the media literacy, I will say that I have appreciated that our senators in particular, and even our members of the House at the federal level, they've done a good job of kind of working together at a bipartisan way. And so I would say at the local level, at the state level, kind of follow that lead, because they're all able to kind of, they all kind of agree, this is going to be harmful for all of us, right? Whatever tactics are used by the left will be used by the right, will be used by Russia, will be, so that's what I would say there. As far as, information, and this kind of goes back to the media literacy, like, do our young people really know how much of their information is being captured in so many different ways? And your point about the registration, it's gotten to the point where we just do it without even thinking about it, but we do need to be much more conscientious of it, and then hold those organizations who are gathering that information accountable. Like, what are their privacy policies? And that should be made clear when you're required to register. So thank you for bringing up both of those points.
We've got 2 questions in chat. One is from Babette about how to get through to students who are already deeply cynical, and ways to help them distinguish between good information and disinformation. And then from Michael, how can AI be targeting Black and brown voters, and what can we educate those communities potentially through churches?
Yeah, I'll start. I know our time is really up, but I'll kind of combine those two because they're sort of related. I think when it comes to students and also those who are in communities that are disproportionately affected by these issues, there needs to be more education. that has to happen. Now, with students, and honestly, I love what Professor Dawson said. It shouldn't even be happening at the collegiate level. We need to start in elementary school. We need to start much earlier, exposing and making young people aware of again, the promises of technology, but also the perils, because that might help them in their life, because things are so different now than they were when probably most of us were coming along. The same thing needs to happen too in those communities that are, marginalized or disproportionately affected. I don't know if it will be through the churches, but we have to find a way to educate people and get them, number one, knowing about what's going on from this standpoint, but also how to use the technology and understand its implications. And I don't have a good answer on that other than educating. But it needs to be an effort that's beyond the scope of what Professor Dawson and I can do. I do think a lot of this needs to happen at the government level too. They need to have some education and literacy programs for America, because it's a lot of people who are out of the loop on what's happening. But I also defer to my colleague as well to expound upon that.
Yeah, it's a tough question. And we know, like Cambridge Analytica, which we've already talked about, they were targeting Black and brown people on Facebook, right? They were coming up with these profiles so that they could target them specifically to provide misinformation and and impact their. And so we know we're being targeted, and there's a responsibility on the part of social media platforms, right? They do content mediation, but they need to be more robust about it. There's a lot of discussion, cases at the Supreme Court on that. Hard to know how that's going to all shake out in the end. But these are really, serious concerns. And the more we kind of educate and expose, shine a light on it, right? They say the best, cure for false information, misinformation is, truthful information, right? The sunlight is the best disinfectant for disinformation. But the problem is that the bad stuff gets out, right, virally. And it's just really slow to be able to respond to that. So again, appreciate all the questions. These are tough issues, but I do think that this is, one of the things that need to be done. So again, thank you to Ellen and this entire democracy project. We just have to all kind of, as a community, communicate, learn. We learn as well by doing these sessions and communicating it and sharing it with our friends, families, colleagues, and students.
Yes, that is
Dr.
our
Nelson, Dr. Grady, I just want to thank you so much. I hope the folks who are still here will join me in thanking you. Thank you for spending a few extra minutes with us. I know that we could continue this conversation for another hour minimum, and maybe we'll have to have a follow-up a workshop in the fall to see where we are then. But thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a great weekend, and a great week next week.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.